Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of Sales TV Live. Today, we're discussing the unique challenges of founder led sales. We're joined by Kayvon Touran. Kayvon is the CEO and co founder of Zal.ai and has extensive background in launching and building startups. Kayvon, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you. Let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what led you to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So I've spent my entire career working in early stage technology startups, and I've worn essentially every hat that you can. And yeah, for the last 5 of those years, 5 plus years, I worked at an edtech incubator called Noodle, where I joined as a product manager. I got sprinkled around the portfolio doing product management at different companies, solving different problems within K through 12 and post secondary. And eventually that culminated in me launching and co-creating a product with the CEO of Noodle. And Yeah, I had a great experience doing that. But it also sort of gave me this insight into the industry when it came to corporate learning and workforce development, which is that a lot of workforce development isn't so great from the perspective of the learner, but that B, a lot of the companies that go to universities looking for very expensive corporate development uh, don't actually know what they need. And they definitely don't know how to measure the efficacy of the product they're buying, the training. And so those insights were what sort of led me to sort of see this big opportunity to combine generative AI, learning science, and workforce development, and to found Zal with my co-founder. So that's sort of how I got here.
All right. So, can you share your experience with founder led sales? I mean, what's it look like when you get it right, and what are the implications when you don't?
Yeah, in fact, we can go even a step back. I can share my experience just doing sales first and foremost. So,
Sure.
early on in my career, I started off as an account executive. Um, as I think even before that, I was doing like more BDR type work, and I found some early success doing that line of work. I really was attracted to the kind of work. I liked the sort of challenge of building a system, feeling sort of the push and pull of something working or not working, looking for sort of the subtle cues. I really fed into sort of the art and science element of what I think is like, trite, but like fundamental to doing sales. And it's funny because in starting Zal, I thought, oh, I'll call upon that experience, no problem. And, I'll help the company make its first initial sales and we'll be off and running. This is going to be great. And it's like that Mike Tyson quote, right? Like everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, kind of thing. So I slowly started to remember that this wasn't so easy, especially at the beginning when you don't have sort of the brand and all the work that the fine folks in marketing are doing to really establish the credibility of the organization, the product. For you as a salesperson to just essentially piggyback off of and be an expression of, right? And so doing all of those things at once to get a founder led sales motion off the ground humbled me a bit and is still humbling me. Um, but I think I'm finding a lot of joy in starting up that process. So I want to pause there and go back to you, Rob, so I can make sure I'm answering specific your question. But I want to lay down that as the foundation for sort of where we're at.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to figure out really the skills that founders should develop to be effective in the sales role, and then I'll have a follow up from that.
Yeah. Well, I think for specifically the sales function, and I think it's hard as an early stage founder not to think of it as one jumbled mess of go to market. But I think isolating just the sales function, I think the most important thing, again, I just feel like I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that people have heard before. So apologies, but is really your ability to listen and be empathetic in a conversation. Um, as the individual in charge of founder led sales, you're just as much responsible for making the sale as you are for developing the requirements of the product. And so, in fact, I'd say the latter is worth more than the former at the beginning. And so, I think that's something that's really challenging as a founder if you're not able to identify that and hone in on that skill. Um, yeah, that's probably the most important one.
So you had touched on something, and yeah, well, it's kind of tried. Everyone knows this and whatever, but that was really my follow-on question: is what about those founders that have never been in a sales role before? What are those basics that they need to know? That yes, those of us that have been in sales, we know them so much that they almost seem silly to bring up.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So look, I mean, there's like some fundamentals in terms of how you should be operating as like a salesperson from like a skill basis, and to me, a lot of these things are very tactical. Like you need to be incredibly punctual. You need to follow through on the things that you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to follow up with someone at a certain time, if you say you're going to follow up with materials, you need to be able to do that on time consistently. You need to understand that the way you conduct yourself is an expression of how that person is then interpreting your ability to actually perform the work, no matter how smart and competent you are in that line of work. Their ability to trust you when you're starting at a place of probably zero credibility is going to be based on all of these small micro interactions. And so, like, fundamentals of like professionalism and like good communication, I think, are like really, really paramount. I think those are some of like the like core things. But then, yeah, I mean, we're getting into it a little bit, but I cannot stress how important it is to take a breath, like not think that the way sales works is Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, and like this is not about like slam dunking someone to yes. It's like it's quite the opposite, especially at the beginning of like you really need to demonstrate empathy. You really need to demonstrate a level of humility, like that balance of like, yes, I'm knowledgeable, I'm smart, I've done my homework, but I recognize the 20% nuance that you're about to provide to me in this conversation is going to be critical in me actually being able to solve a meaningful problem for you, which is how we are going to actually engage in a sales narrative together, right? Fundamentally. So, yeah, I think like tactically, it's that stuff that I mentioned in the beginning, and more strategically as like a theme, it's like it's empathy and stuff. So
You had me at Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross.
You
perfect.
lost me at Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross.
No, but I think jokingly, particularly for people that aren't in sales, that's what sales is, isn't it? And
Yeah,
often if you're coming to sales anew, the challenge that you have is that you don't see it as a skill set.
yeah,
So certainly I know I have been in environments where the founders of the business and or the more technical people within the business, they've been to university to understand computer science or whatever it is that they're doing, or design, or whatever the discipline is. And that's a very formal education process. And there are loads of proof points that they've absorbed and are able to repurpose that education to solve specific problems. And then you, Kayvon, well, you've just got to go and sell it, okay? Just chat to a few people and get them to buy it. And actually, it's it, I can't help thinking that there's a huge education process in here for people that are coming from a technical background to understand that the interpersonal bit, the selling bit, the problem solving bit, the actual commerce part of it is not only equally and in some cases more complex than the technical part of it, but it's also more important. You can have the best product in the world, but if nobody buys it, you have nothing.
yeah, exactly. And another thing I'll add to that I think a lot of new founders miss, myself in the same bucket, but maybe these are like my instincts around some of these things are a little bit different because I've had a background in sales, is that I think there's a obsession with iterating on the product. And you hear a lot of people talk about that's like, fundamental to a startup. What you hear less about is how are we iterating on the go-to market motion? And to your point, Adam, I'd argue that's more important, especially
Mm.
in B2B SaaS, because you like and you hear a lot of pundits talking about this now too, is like build the audience and then build a product or service and sell that to them. Like they actually go backwards on that motion. And that's, you see a lot of people talking about that kind of thing. Um, but I mean, regardless of if you do that or not, like, I think you're right that a lot of, like first time founders are surprised at how much of a process is how involved it is and how much is involved in actually creating like not just a sales motion that works with just the founder, right? But then, and I know that's where we're focusing, but then thinking about then how you take that to the next level of hiring someone off the shelf and getting them to take that on. I think I don't know if we should even touch that for this conversation because it's like a whole other thing.
But
But
isn't there a whole thing about founders often needing a cold shower, a dose of reality around this stuff? Because, if you've got product A, product B, and product C that are fit for purpose. So let's say, let's say you've got Oracle, you've got Salesforce, you've got SAP. They're different products, although they operate in the same space. They offer different features and functions in some instances, but actually it makes zero difference which one you go for, because there are massively successful companies that use SAP and massively successful companies that use Salesforce and massively successful companies that use Oracle. And I think that further to your point about this iterating of the product, I've had a really great idea. We can install this feature, or we can put this connector in, or we can have it talking to this thing. And actually, none of that makes any difference, really. Not in the long run, because all of these things are perfectly fit for purpose. And I think we obsess about trying to have a better product rather than having a better story about the product. And I think that founders are often looking to solve a problem that isn't there, because all of us kind of begin thinking about this from the basis of, well, if I'm better, whether that's me as an individual or the product, if I'm better, I'll be more successful. That's nonsense, utter nonsense. VHS and Betamax, the best example of an inferior product winning. And this happens time and again, and it's all about building the relationships, getting the toehold, understanding how you can tell a story that people that are actually buying it can understand, and most importantly, empathize with.
Yeah, no, it's really well said. And I think part of it too is for founders also to be realistic with the industry that they're in and the nature of their product. So, especially if you're talking about if we're talking about just like straight up B2B SaaS, like let's be honest with each other that there are very few technological moats left in terms of your ability to build a SaaS product that no one else can't just copy in terms of features. I'd say amplified by generative AI and AI co-pilot, software development, capability. um, I know a lot of founders aspire to having network effects, and this is like one of my favorite lines. And I don't know if you guys have caught this a lot. Like you'll go through like a big pitch about a startup, and it's like, well, like what's the moat to your business? And it's like, well, all the data that we're collecting will allow us so that at the point that we have, let's say, 10,000 users, that we'll have the data that allows us to then build better recommendation models and XYZ. And we have this private data set. And so then we just win and we keep winning. It's like, yeah, a bad strategy is I'll win because I've already won. Like, how do you, how are you winning day one? And what is the moat day one for someone to actually use you so that you can get to the point where you have 10,000? Because once you have 10,000, it's easy to obviously build off of your private data set or whatever to build that product oriented moat. And I think to your point, like the day one thing that you can do right away, you can start building thought leadership. You can start building a brand. You can get experts to actually talk about your company and how you're positioned to be, so like on the cutting edge of the thing. You can get like there's so many more tangible ways to build a moat around your business as a founder. That has nothing to actually do with the product at the beginning. But I think you need to also understand how you're marrying that with the long-term vision of then the roadmap of then how it folds into the product and how it all sort of gels together. But I agree with you that at the beginning, I think it's really it mostly the case that it's not going to come from the product. So
But equally, I think it's very easy to underplay the importance of the founders in those early days, isn't it? You know, you're the founder of your business, and you consequently are not only the visionary and the kind of the driving force behind it. You're also the figurehead of the business,
mhm.
and I think that you know there's something. If you were thinking of running an ad campaign, heaven forbid, but if you were thinking of running an ad campaign on Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg turned up to your pitch, you'd be immeasurably more likely to purchase that as a result of him being on the pitch.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the challenges is that founders are often distracted from the fundamental tasks within an organization and fail to recognize that actually they are often the secret sauce.
I love that. I mean, I'm just curious, what do you think some of those fundamental tasks are?
Well, the most fundamental of them is selling stuff.
Yeah.
You know, because without that you have no revenue, you can't hire people, you can't pay yourselves, you can't develop the product, you can't satisfy the customer need. So the most important thing is to sell stuff, and those fundamental tasks. And you know, Mark Zuckerberg would be a good example of this because he still does some coding on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because he wants to keep his hand in and he wants to have some ownership of that rather than just owning shares within the organization. And I think that you know your ability to tell a compelling narrative is much greater than mine because it's your business, not mine.
Yep.
And you know, I work and you know another great example, Gary V. You know, he stands up and you know he oozes passion for what it is he does from every pore, and he says, you know, your employees are never going to work as hard as you because it's your dream, not theirs.
Yep.
And I think that often we lose sight of this, don't we? We think, oh, well, this will be great. You know, I'll found a business, we'll start to get some sales in, then I can hire loads of people to do that. Actually, no, that's the best people. And I think that this is one of the keys of having a flat hierarchy within an organization. We often see the management as being the objective. You know, this is the glamorous job. I'm going to manage everybody. I'm going to manage the business. I'm going to be managing director of the business. Actually, if you're the best salesperson, you should be the salesperson, not even the sales manager. You should be the salesperson. If you own the business and you're the salesperson because you're the best person at selling, that you work within a meritocracy, don't you? And you're providing the maximum value into the organization you possibly can.
No, I love that. I mean, I think I can't agree with that more. It is definitely something that I've noticed is, I think also again confusing to a lot of and now I can speak more specifically to like tech founders. I think that there's a misunderstanding there with what the CEO position is about. I think it's fundamentally like don't run out of money and sell stuff. Like sell stuff to customers, sell stuff to new recruits on your team, sell stuff to internally to get stuff done. Like you're selling nonstop. And I think especially externally, there's like an ickiness factor that you know a lot of people talk about when it comes to the idea of sales. But I just think it's the totally wrong mindset. I mean, no matter how much you fancy yourself, you know, a sophisticated product or technologist type of individual, if you're actually passionate about building technology to solve problems, then you need to be able to speak with lots of customers. You need to be able to empathize with them genuinely. And oh, by the way, the path to building an effective product is the same way that you are effectively able to sell. So I think there's like just a total misnomer about that. So I totally agree around that fundamental stake. And I'll also say that the best CEOs that I've ever worked for sell to this day, even though their companies are, you know, 500 people and worth over $100 million or whatever, they're still selling. And it's not just because, to your point, they're really good at it, or to another point you made, that a lot of people in the sales process now, again, like I'm thinking of a couple of them, they're much more, and I think this depends also on the industry and stuff. These are CEOs in sort of high ticket sales items, so it also like fundamentally they think of it from that perspective. But like you're right, when they come to a room to a sales call, changes the immediate tone of like how serious is this company about winning my business. And especially like what are your advantages as a startup founder. Like it really boils down to this. If it's like my company versus someone else's company, and we've gotten to that point of like they're going to go with Zal or one of our competitors in the marketplace. What are our strengths? Well, it's certainly not going to be the strengths of the other provider, which is going to be white papers, proof points, you know, XYZ of like all the times they've done this before and the system that they've created around it and how they feel really confident in the results. What am I going to be selling against? The fact that I'm in the room, that every single resource of this company and my reputation, as well as the reputation of my company, is going to be on the line to making sure that you look like a rock star by hiring us as a vendor. Like that is my value prop.
That's the key thing. I always think that for young people in a customer facing role, like in a sales role, they seem ashamed of the fact they're young.
Right.
I've got 20 years experience, you haven't got any experience. Yeah, well, that's a positive, that's not a negative, because
Right.
you're going to be Kayvon, you're going to be my first client, so I'm just going to work exponentially harder for you than anyone else will because you're my first client. And to say, here's a list of my successful clients, it's like me saying you should marry me because here's a list of all of my ex-wives. It's like it doesn't make any sense, really, because you're trying to convince people that you are going to give them a disproportionate amount of thought. And actually, a lot of the way we set this up, all of the parallels we have in our lives are parallels that undermine that thing that we're trying to present to people. So yeah, absolutely. I'm going to buy from your company because you're the founder and you came to the pitch.
Right. And there's a Paul Graham thing on this, and Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, talks about this a lot. But when they were in the early days of building their company, I think it was Paul Graham that sat down with them and said, look, you don't want 1 million customers that like you. You want 100 customers that love you.
Love you, yeah.
And the whole idea is that, well, those 100 customers that love you, like from the beginning of time, like this is how you build that virality and people talking about your business. And you can actually start thinking about how to really scale. Is word of mouth is so powerful. And I think it's another really common issue that founders, I think, deal with is you think about, okay, how am I going to create value? But how does that value scale? The thing is, those are two different problems. Like the whole 0 to 1, 1 to infinity thing. So like as founders, as people on the ground floor, like you should be doing lots of things that don't scale, that are on the spectrum of scalability and value, heavily weighing value. Like the whole point is like I should be giving a disproportionate amount of value because I am the unproven contender in the room. And I am going to put all this stuff extra into the basket of making sure that it goes well. And you build the credibility and reputation of someone who does that. And then you start to think, okay, what are the things that I'm giving a lot of extra time on that are not scalable right now that I can start prioritizing and thinking, okay, look, I'm doing like 5 things. The top 3 are the only ones that actually people are really loving. The last 2 takes a bunch of time, but people don't even really care about that. How can I scale those things? Now let me go talk to my co-founder, who's a technologist, and say, hey, like, if we were now going from 100 to 1,000, right? Like the whole, how would we be able to do that en masse? But like, I think that's like, and that's another thing is like people are so focused on like, what am I going to do when I'm super successful and I need to scale this? It's like, well, why don't we just start with what are you going to do to, like get the left foot in front of the right foot? Like, so anyways, I'm only so passionate about this because this is giving me a forum to self-reflect on all the mistakes that I'm making every single day when it comes to these types of these things.
And one of the things that I love about these sessions that we do is that they're online therapy sessions for all of us. We're on that kind of metaphorical couch, aren't we, talking about our problems and clarifying those problems. And I think that one of the really interesting things is that the learning process, what is it they say, a wise man looks at someone else's mistakes, a normal man looks at their own mistakes, a fool keeps making the same mistakes. And most of us are in the normal stroke fool category most of the time. We keep doing these repeating things. And whether the conversation means that you say the words that make the difference or someone else says the words that makes the difference, doesn't matter. But we need to move into that wise man category. I need to watch you fall over and say, it's slippery, I need to be careful how I tread there, rather than you falling over and then me falling over and going, oh, you just did that. Actually, there's no lesson in that, is there?
Yeah, no, that's well said. Agreed.
Mm.
Kayvon, we're out of time, if you can believe it.
Wow, that
Th-
really ran fast.
It really does. That was fantastic. How can people learn more about you, your organization? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, so check out our website, Zal.ai, Zal.ai, to learn more about the company and sort of what we're up to. We just launched a new newsletter series called Workforce Evolved. Really, really interesting conversations with a lot of the foremost experts in learning science, generative AI, workforce development coming together, providing interesting opinions on the space and sort of what we're doing. And otherwise, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, would love to connect with anyone who's sort of passionate about some of these ideas. So
Fantastic.
Cool.
And speaking of newsletters, we now have a newsletter. You can
nice.
get show highlights, you can get beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. Scan the QR code on screen or join us at SalesTV.live/newsletter. This has been another edition of Sales TV Live. On behalf of the panelists and everyone at Sales TV Live, to our guests and to our audience, thank you for being an active part of today's show, and we'll see you next time.